Corin Alder was only 8 when he followed Valor, the rescued German shepherd who never left his side, into the melting streets of Frosthaven. What began as a hungry boy seeking scraps turned into a night that rewrote the fate of an entire town. Valor's frantic barking led straight to a garbage truck left humming in the dark. Inside, 2 police officers lay bound, poisoned, and holding the final clues to a secret the government thought it buried forever. That discovery sparked a chain of courage, redemption, and the kind of miracle that only rises when a forgotten child chooses compassion over fear. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the everyday angels God places in our path. Snow drifted across Frosthaven's outskirts, muffling the world in a pale, breath-stealing silence. Corin Alder, an 8-year-old homeless boy with a narrow frame and hollow cheeks, trudged through the alley behind a row of aging apartment blocks, his oversized brown coat hanging on him like a shed skin belonging to a larger child. His dark hair, unwashed and tangled, clung to his forehead, and his cracked lips trembled not only from the cold, but from the quiet fear that lived inside him, a fear of being unseen, unheard, unwanted. Beside him padded Valor, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose ribs showed beneath his coarse black and tan fur. Valor's gait carried the uneven rhythm of an old injury in his right hind leg, but his amber eyes were bright with a protective sharpness that often felt more human than canine. To Corin, Valor was warmth in winter, family in emptiness, and the only witness who had never abandoned him. They scavenged behind the abandoned Frosthaven bus depot, a place where old schedules fluttered like ghosts in cracked display cases, and the air smelled faintly of oil and forgotten footsteps. Corin lifted a lid from a battered trash can and winced as icy wind stung his eyes. Behind him, Valor sniffed through the snow, tail flicking with tension. The boy whispered, "Easy, buddy. We just need something small tonight." But his voice quivered with the exhaustion of too many hungry evenings. Suddenly Valor froze, ears pricking high, muscles tightening under his thin fur. The growl that rose from his throat was low, raw, instinctive. Corin straightened, heart lurching. Valor never growled at shadows. He growled at danger. Before Corin could grab the frayed rope used as a makeshift leash, Valor lunged forward, claws scraping on icy pavement. "Valor, wait!" the boy cried, stumbling after him as the dog tore across the snowy lot toward the small municipal truck yard. There, a green city garbage truck idled with its hazard lights blinking weakly through the flurry. Corin slipped twice on patches of ice, palms burning as he caught himself, but he didn't stop. Fear spiked through him, not the kind born from monsters under beds, but the sharper kind born from losing the only friend he had left. Valor beelined toward the back of the truck, barking with frantic urgency. Corin reached him, chest heaving, and climbed the steel safety step, confusion turning to cold horror. From inside the half-open compactor bay came a strangled, muffled groan. Corin leaned forward, breath fogging in the short bursts, and saw them. 2 city police officers lay jammed inside the compactor cavity, half submerged in winter sludge and refuse. Officer Tamsin Crow, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp cheekbones and olive skin now mottled blue from cold, had her dark hair plastered to her face with muddy water. Even bruised, she carried an unmistakable presence. Tamsin was the sort of officer neighbors described as stern but fair, the kind who broke up schoolyard fights with the same intensity she used to handle bar disputes. But now her wrists were bound behind her with electrical cord, her mouth sealed with duct tape, eyes glassy with poison and fear. Beside her lay Officer Hale Mercer, a 40-year-old man built with the broad, sturdy frame of someone who once played high school football before life settled into routine. His square jaw, usually shadowed by the beginning of a beard each evening, was streaked with grime and blood. Mercer had a reputation in town as the calm voice during crises, the kind of man who stayed on the line with frightened callers until help arrived, a habit formed after he failed to save his younger brother in a childhood accident. That loss shaped him, softened him, made him protective in ways few understood. Now, barely conscious, his eyes fluttered as if trapped in a slow nightmare. Corin's breath hitched, his throat closed around a sound he couldn't name: terror, pity, disbelief. He wasn't supposed to matter in a world where adults walked past him on sidewalks, but suddenly he was the only one who could do anything. Panic surged, but something deeper rose with it, the stubbornness that kept him alive all these years. He slammed his small fists against the cab door. "Help! Help!" he screamed, voice cracking. Valor barked with explosive ferocity, paws scraping against the metal. Their desperate noise echoed around the deserted truck yard, bouncing off fuel tanks and chain-link fences until it reached the ears of Sergeant Jonah Pike. Jonah, a 45-year-old night shift patrol sergeant, had been circling the truck yard as part of his routine winter checks. He was tall, with a weathered face carved by years of stress and the aftershock of personal grief. His graying beard framed a mouth often set in a tight line, not out of anger, but because he had grown used to bracing for the worst. His daughter's death in a car accident 5 years ago had hollowed him. Since then, nights felt heavier, and he moved through them like a man counting ghosts. The moment he heard the boy's screams, Jonah broke into a run, boots crunching over ice. His flashlight beam sliced through the snow and illuminated the horrifying scene. "Jesus," he muttered, rushing to the control panel, his voice steadied into professional sharpness. "Kid, stay back. I've got it." He disengaged the compactor system with a slap of his gloved hand, then grabbed his radio, barking into it with the controlled urgency of a man who had seen death too closely to waste a second. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Pike. 2 officers found bound and injured in a garbage truck. Possible poisoning. Send medical and backup immediately." When he turned back toward Corin, the boy was shaking violently, arms wrapped around himself. Jonah shrugged off his heavy patrol coat and draped it over him without hesitation. Valor pressed against Corin's leg, trembling from adrenaline but refusing to back away from the truck. Jonah looked at the boy, then at the loyal dog, then at the 2 dying officers inside the compactor. In that instant, he understood something unspoken. None of this would have been discovered in time without them. And as the distant wail of sirens began to rise through the snowy streets, Jonah knew that this night, this boy, this dog, this impossible discovery would change Frosthaven forever. Snow lashed sideways against the tall windows of St. Gabriel Hospital, turning each pane into a trembling sheet of white noise. Corin Alder sat curled on a hard plastic chair outside the trauma bay, the hospital's fluorescent lights washing out the faint color in his already pale face. His narrow shoulders hunched deep inside Sergeant Jonah Pike's oversized patrol coat, which still carried the earthy scent of winter leather and pine needles. The coat engulfed him, yet the boy held it tightly, as if frightened it might suddenly vanish the way people so often had in his life. At his feet lay Valor, stretched out protectively, ribs rising and falling in shaky breaths. The 6-year-old German shepherd looked even thinner under the harsh lighting, but his amber eyes were unyielding, fixed on the door that had swallowed the injured officers. Jonah stood nearby, his tall frame leaning against the wall with an exhausted heaviness that lived in his bones. His weathered face, lined by grief, sharpened by years of night patrol, held an expression caught between fury and worry. The streaks of gray on his beard glinted under the lights as he rubbed a hand across his jaw, listening for updates that never came fast enough. Dr. Rowan Keene entered the hall at a brisk pace, brushing melted snow from the shoulders of her teal veterinary coat. Rowan was in her late 20s, petite, with auburn hair tied in a loose ponytail that allowed stubborn strands to escape around her temples. Her hazel eyes were sharp, observant, the eyes of someone who had learned early in life that small details could mean the difference between life and death for the animals entrusted to her. She carried a warmth in her voice, a softness born not of naivety, but of a person who chose kindness despite having seen its absence too many times. Rowan knelt beside Valor, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose as she examined a scrape along the dog's flank. "He's underweight," she murmured, fingers tracing the shadows of ribs beneath the fur, "and dehydrated. But this—" Her voice trailed off when she lifted the dog's left ear and uncovered the small tattoo etched into the thin skin, faded but unmistakably deliberate. The symbol wasn't a simple ID. It was coded, structured, military. Rowan's breath hitched and she inhaled sharply, memories flashing back to a government seminar she'd attended during her internship, a seminar she'd been told to forget. Back then, she'd seen diagrams of behavioral conditioning patterns, handler codes, and the rumored Harbor Light Initiative, a program said to combine canine training with high-risk chemical detection fields. Officially, the program had been shut down. Unofficially, she suspected otherwise. "Jonah," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Jonah crossed the hall and his expression tightened when he saw the tattoo. "That's not a city registry mark." "No," Rowan replied, brows knitted. "It's federal. K9 from a classified division." Corin flinched slightly at the word federal. To him, federal meant people who took things, homes, pets, safety, things he never got back. Valor nudged Corin's knee, calming him. Jonah exhaled, tension biting through his voice. "I'll cross-check it in the old database, the one they pretend doesn't exist anymore." He left briefly, returning minutes later with a tablet showing an outdated, half-corrupted file. "Harbor Light Initiative," he said, jaw tightening. Valor wasn't just a stray, he was part of something big. Rowan studied Corin's frightened eyes and softened her tone. "It's not bad, Corin. It just means Valor was trained before, maybe for something dangerous, but he's here with you now, okay?" The boy nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his chest. Inside the ICU, Officer Tamsin Crow stirred. Nurses immediately called Jonah and he rushed to her bedside. Crow looked far smaller than her reputation allowed. Her strong features washed pale, lips cracked, dark hair matted to her forehead. Her fingers twitched and she forced a whisper past the duct tape burn marks on her cheeks. "Jonah, listen." Her breath grew shallow, like each inhale was borrowed. "The truck wasn't random." Her eyes rolled slightly as she fought dizziness. "Man, scar, left side of neck, Northridge water plant." Jonah leaned in, but her words dissolved into a faint gasp. The monitor beeped in an erratic stutter. Nurses ushered him back as they stabilized her, leaving Jonah standing in the doorway with a clenched jaw and memories swirling like winter smoke. A name surfaced, a name from whispered police briefings and buried federal notes. Silas Reddick, once a brilliant biosecurity specialist, later a man broken by tragedy. His wife's death in what officials labeled a containment malfunction had driven him into a storm of quiet fury. He'd disappeared soon after, swallowed by government secrecy. Jonah felt a chill settle beneath his uniform, deeper than the winter outside. Reddick had been connected to Harbor Light, connected to Y13, the neurotoxin found in the officer's blood. For years, Jonah had assumed Reddick was dead, or worse, free. As the thought settled, Corin approached timidly, gripping Jonah's coat sleeve. "Is Officer Crow gonna die?" he whispered. Jonah crouched to meet the boy's gaze. In Corin's dark eyes, he saw his daughter's frightened face from 5 years ago, the night she didn't make it home. He refused to see another child bear that look. "Not if we can stop it," Jonah said, "and we will." Corin nodded, trusting him despite not knowing how to trust anymore. A new figure entered the hall, a nurse named Leora Mayfield, who would appear again later in small but pivotal ways. She was a woman in her early 40s, tall, with sandy blonde hair pinned neatly under her cap, her gentle gray eyes carrying the calm certainty of someone who had raised 3 children alone after her husband died in a warehouse collapse years earlier. She handed Jonah a sealed vial. Officer Mercer's talk screen just came through, she said softly. It matches something I've never seen before. You'll want to read the report. Jonah thanked her, and Leora disappeared into another room, her presence quiet yet grounding. Rowan rejoined them, wiping melted snow from her glasses. Jonah, if the dog's from Harbor Light, then he might remember something. Dogs trained under that program weren't just taught commands, they were taught recognition. Jonah frowned. Recognition of what? Rowan hesitated. Threats, chemicals, people. Corin looked down at Valor, who was watching them with intense, intelligent stillness, as if he understood every word. Jonah exhaled sharply. If Silas Reddick is involved, we're not dealing with a random attack. This is personal and planned. The snow hammered harder against the windows. Somewhere deep inside the hospital, an alarm chimed before fading. Jonah looked at the boy, the dog, the hall filled with sterile light. Something had been set in motion the moment Corin heard that muffled groan in the garbage truck. And tonight, the truth had begun to surface, one mark behind a dog's ear at a time. Snow thickened over Frosthaven, as if the sky itself had chosen to bury the town under a hush of white secrecy. Jonah Pike stood in the dimly lit operations room of the police station, the glow of monitors painting sharp lines across his weathered face. The streaks of gray in his beard caught the cold blue light as he read the federal briefing that had arrived an hour too late to be useful. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his uniform jacket, the memory of Officer Crow's trembling voice replaying like a broken record in his mind. A scarred man, the old water plant. Nothing about it felt random. Everything felt too familiar to the kind of ghosts Jonah had spent years trying not to see. Agent Maris Alder stepped into the room without announcing herself. She moved with controlled precision, a tall and angular woman in her late 30s with short, dark copper hair brushed back in crisp lines. Her features were sharp, hawk-like cheekbones, narrow nose, and gray-blue eyes that scanned information with the cold efficiency of someone who had long stopped expecting the world to play fair. The faint scar across her left eyebrow, almost hidden by her hairline, hinted at an old field mission that had gone violently wrong. Maris had the aura of a person who survived by trusting data more than people. Her voice was smooth but carried an undercurrent of steel. "The lab just confirmed a secondary compound," she said, handing Jonah a printed report. Y-13 modified, more unstable, more deliberate. Jonah's jaw clenched. So Reddick is upgrading it. Maris crossed her arms. Or finishing what he believed the government started. Rowan Keene entered behind her, her teal veterinary coat still speckled with melted snow. She looked out of place among the agents and hardened officers, soft-featured, petite auburn hair pulled back with strands escaping in that perpetually frazzled way of someone who cared too much to think about appearances. Her hazel eyes held quiet concern as she stepped toward Jonah. "I checked Valor again," she said. "His reaction to the chemical traces in the officer's clothes is consistent with trained recognition. He's not reacting randomly. He's remembering." Jonah nodded slowly. "Remembering Northridge?" Corin Alder peeked around the doorway, clutching the old phone Jonah had loaned him. The oversized patrol coat he wore dwarfed his small, thin body, and his dark hair fell into his eyes as he hesitated before entering. Valor pressed close to his leg, the big dog's uneven gait making a faint scraping sound on the station's tile floor. Corin stepped forward, voice barely above a whisper. I saw lights at the old water plant, and Valor growled at it, not the way he growls at cats or shadows. This was different. Maris turned with sudden interest, her analytical gaze scanning the boy like a case file come to life. "You're sure the lights were inside the plant?" Corin nodded, swallowing. Hard. Being the center of attention always made him feel smaller, like the world had suddenly grown too loud. Jonah stepped beside him, laying a steadying hand on his shoulder. "He knows what he saw," Jonah said firmly. Before Maris could reply, the station doors swung open, letting in a gust of icy wind and a new figure, Deputy Lorne Hayfield. He was a tall, lanky man in his early 40s, with sandy brown hair tucked under a worn sheriff's hat. His beard was patchy, more an afterthought than a style choice, and his light brown eyes carried the weary patience of a man who had spent 20 years breaking up bar fights more often than solving crimes. His uniform jacket was too big around the shoulders, suggesting he preferred comfort over formality. "Road to Northridge is getting buried by the hour," Lorne said, stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's moving in faster than expected. If we're going, it's now or never." Maris strode toward the map table, tapping the abandoned water plant on the digital display. Reddick wouldn't pick this location by accident. Northridge was used to disperse diluted chemicals through the municipal system during the original Harbor Light tests. If he's back there now... Jonah finished the thought grimly. "It's not to reminisce." Rowan looked at Corin, then Valor. Valor reacted to something familiar. If his training linked him to Northridge, he might sense dangers we can't detect. Corin's small hand tightened around the dog's fur. "He'll help. Won't you, boy?" Valor pressed his head against the boy's hip, amber eyes steady and unblinking, a silent confirmation. Jonah grabbed his winter coat and radio. "We move in 15. Maris raised an eyebrow. "We? This is a federal matter now." Jonah gave her a look that was equal parts exhausted and unamused. "2 officers from my department are dying in your federal matter. I'm coming." Lorne nodded. "And you're not going without someone who knows every pipe and vent in that plant. My dad worked maintenance there." Maris hesitated, but only for a breath. She wasn't used to partnership, but she wasn't foolish enough to turn down local expertise either. "Fine, but I lead." As the group prepared gear and readied the cruiser, Rowan knelt beside Corin. Her gloved hand rested gently on his shoulder. "Corin, I need you to stay here where it's warm." But the boy shook his head, fear and determination flickering across his fragile features. "Valor only listens to me when he's scared. You said he remembers things. What if he remembers the wrong way without me?" Jonah crouched down, searching the boy's face, the same way he once searched his daughter's when she was afraid of thunderstorms. "You'll stay in the car when we get there," he said gently. "You don't go inside, not for anything." Corin nodded, though worry twisted in his stomach. 20 minutes later, the convoy rolled through the snowy forest, lights bouncing across drifts and pine branches heavy with ice. Valor sat pressed between Corin and Jonah in the front seat, the dog tense, breathing fast, ears trembling whenever the headlights cut across the looming silhouette of the abandoned plant. Northridge rose from the valley like a rusted skeleton, broken windows, collapsed piping, and towers that jutted into the storm like accusing fingers aimed at heaven. Faint light flickered behind one of the cracked upper windows. Jonah killed the engine. Silence fell, except for the distant hum of machinery that shouldn't have been running for 20 years. Maris whispered, "He's in there." Valor stiffened, then with a low growl, he stared directly at the main filtration building as if recognizing an old nightmare. Jonah exchanged a look with Maris, Rowan, and Lorne, each face reflecting the same chilling understanding. Whatever waited inside Northridge was not just a criminal, it was the past, unfinished, unburied, and waking. And as the storm tightened around them like a clenched fist, Jonah knew one thing with cold certainty. They were already too late to turn back. Snow battered the broken shell of the Northridge water plant, each gust slamming against rusted steel like a warning no one inside would heed. The storm pressed hard against the shattered windows and hollow towers, turning every loose pipe and dangling grate into an eerie wind chime. The air smelled of iron, mildew, and something sharper, chemical residue that lingered like a memory trying to claw its way back into the present. Deep within the plant, past corridors where frost clung to peeling paint, Silas Reddick worked with a feverish determination. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, their pale glow reflecting off his silver hair. His face, weathered and sunken, held exhaustion as well as conviction. The long scar trailing across the right side of his neck, a jagged white reminder of the accident that killed his wife, stood stark against his gray, unshaven stubble. His ashen blue eyes, rimmed with red, darted between gauges, valves, and the modified hydraulic lines feeding into the garbage truck positioned in the center of the facility. The vehicle was city issue, but someone had torn it apart and rebuilt it from the inside out. The compactor unit was fitted with dispersal vents, the metal reinforced, and the inner cavity wired for controlled heat release. It was now a perfect delivery mechanism, one that would roll right through Frosthaven's morning routes without raising suspicion. Silas muttered under his breath as he adjusted a pressure dial. His voice cracked with bitterness. They buried the truth, but fear always brings it back. Behind him, bound to a support pillar, Dr. Rowan Keene struggled against the zip ties cutting into her wrists. Her auburn hair was disheveled, strands falling over her flushed, tear-streaked face. Her normally warm hazel eyes were wide with a mixture of fury and dread. The teal veterinary coat she had worn earlier was smeared with grime. Tape sealed her mouth, but she breathed fast, panicked as her gaze locked on the swirling chemicals being siphoned into the truck. Silas didn't look at her as he spoke. "You know the ratios. You were trained in the protocols. Don't lie. I saw the coursework list on your file." His tone trembled. "Help me stabilize the compound, or more people will die by accident than I intend." Rowan shook her head violently, refusing. Silas glared, jaw twitching. "You think defying me saves them? No, it only delays the inevitable." But even as he said it, his hands shook, not just from cold, but from fractured conviction. Outside the plant, the blizzard screamed louder than sirens. Corin Alder stumbled through the storm, half pulled by Valor's pacing stride. The boy's thin frame shivered beneath the oversized winter coat Jonah had given him. Snow gathered on his dark hair, stinging his eyes every time he blinked. His breath puffed in desperate clouds as he clung to the leash tied around Valor's neck. Valor, usually disciplined and quiet, was frantic. The German shepherd's ribs flexed visibly beneath his thick black and tan coat as he strained toward the plant, nails scraping ice. His amber eyes were fixed ahead, not with fear, but something like recognition. He limped slightly on his old injury, yet pushed on with stubborn urgency. Corin whispered through chattering teeth, "Slow down, boy, please." Valor didn't. He pulled the child through a small break in the side fence and down a narrow service alley leading toward a forgotten maintenance door. The handle was rusted, but Corin forced it open with both hands, the metal groaning as it gave way. A gust of icy wind followed them inside, slamming the door shut. The interior was worse than the outside. Every footstep echoed endlessly. Old catwalks rattled overhead. The dying lights flickered like failing stars, and the air was thick with a metallic tang. Then Corin heard it, the low rumble of a diesel engine. He crept along the wall until he reached the edge of the main chamber and froze. A man with a scar on his neck stood beside a towering garbage truck, his silhouette huge against the chemical tanks. Rowan was tied up. Pipes pumped glowing liquid into the truck's compactor. Every instinct told Corin to run. A clatter echoed behind him, a single metal bolt. His shoe had kicked it. Silas whipped around. Their eyes met, Corin's wide with terror, Silas's with shock, and something even more fractured, recognition. A child abandoned by the world staring at a man who believed the world had abandoned him too. Silas lifted his gun. Corin stumbled backward, heartbeats slamming against his ribs. Before the shot rang out, a blur of fur launched past Corin. Valor threw himself between the boy and the gunman, barking with a deep, thunderous sound that vibrated through the chamber. Silas fired, but the bullet ricocheted off a steel beam. Chaos erupted. The double doors burst open as Jonah Pike kicked them inward. Maris Alder charged in behind him with her weapon drawn, her sharp eyes locked on the target. Deputy Lorne Hayfield followed, looking far more tense than he ever did during bar disputes. Floodlights from the tactical team behind them cast long shadows across the chamber. Jonah shouted, "Silas, step away from the truck!" Silas spun, wild-eyed. "You don't get it! They forced my hand! You all did!" Maris advanced slowly, voice steady but edged. "Drop the weapon. Whatever you think this does, it won't bring her back." Silas's face twisted with grief. "No, but it will make them listen." He lunged toward the release lever that would send liquefied Y-13 into the truck's dispersal vents. Valor reacted first. With a guttural bark, he hurled his body onto the control console. His paws slammed the switches. Sparks flew as the redirect valve jammed. The flow of chemical diverted away from the garbage truck, funneling into an auxiliary sealed tank used decades ago for emergency storage. Silas shrieked and fired blindly. A spray of fine mist burst into the air. Valor inhaled it before anyone could react. He staggered, whined, then collapsed, chest heaving. "No!" Corin screamed. Maris tackled Silas, slamming him against the railing. Lorne rushed to restrain him while Silas thrashed and yelled incoherently. Jonah hurried to cut Rowan free, lifting her trembling form into his arms as she ripped the tape from her mouth. Rowan fell to her knees beside Valor. "Hold him. Just hold him still." Her voice cracked as she pulled a small syringe from her inner coat pocket, a relic she had taken the night before just in case. It contained the prototype antidote once intended for K-9s in the Harbor Light Initiative. Her hands shook violently as she injected it into Valor's neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Valor's breathing, ragged and shallow, steadied, just enough. Rowan exhaled a sob. Corin buried his face against Valor's neck, whispering, "Don't leave me. Please don't." And the storm roared outside as if the entire world were holding its breath for the battered dog who had just saved a town that didn't even know his name. Early spring crept into Frosthaven in quiet breaths. The ice that had gripped the streets for months loosened in thin, translucent sheets. Water dripped steadily from rooftops like a clock counting down the town's slow return to life. Patches of pale sunlight broke through the gray clouds, illuminating streets that had seen too much darkness and too many secrets. Corin Alder stood at the window of Sergeant Jonah Pike's cabin on the south edge of town, a small wooden house wedged between a thinning pine grove and the frozen creek that now murmured with meltwater. Corin wore a sweater that was slightly too big for him, the sleeves brushing his knuckles, but it was warm in a way he had never known before. Valor lay curled at his feet, his black and tan coat clean now, glossy in the light, though the faint patch on his neck, where Rowan had injected the antidote, remained as a subtle reminder of the night when everything almost ended. Jonah had insisted they stay here for the weeks following the Northridge incident. His cabin smelled faintly of pine bark and old books, a comforting scent that matched the man himself, rugged, weathered, and steady. Jonah's broad shoulders and quiet strength filled the space easily, but he was gentle in ways that surprised Corin. He spoke in short sentences, but every word carried weight. His grief over losing his daughter had softened into a kind of patient tenderness, one that Corin recognized even if he didn't fully understand. This morning, Jonah was shaving at the bathroom sink, the sound of steel scraping against his jaw echoing lightly down the hall. His beard had grown in thicker during the long winter, and now he trimmed it carefully, revealing more of his angular features, the firm jaw, the tired gray eyes that held both pain and kindness. He emerged wearing his freshly pressed uniform, though the lines of exhaustion never fully left his face. "Big day today," Jonah said, as he glanced toward Corin. Corin nodded nervously. "Yeah." Valor lifted his head, ears perked, tail thumping once. In Denver, the federal courthouse braced itself for national attention. Silas Reddick, now a shadow of the man who once roamed the Northridge plant like a storm wrapped in human skin, was brought before the court in chains. His silver hair lay flat, his unshaven face gaunt, and his hands trembled slightly as he stood in the defendant's box. Gone was the feverish fire in his storm-gray eyes. In its place was only a hollow ache, the same ache of a man who had lost everything long before he tried to destroy something else. Judge Adriana Whitlock, a woman in her late 50s, tall, with ash-blonde hair tied in a strict bun and piercing dark eyes, read the verdict with the calm precision of someone who had witnessed the worst of humanity many times before. Her voice filled the room with formal gravity. Silas Reddick is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Silas did not protest. He simply exhaled, shoulders sinking, and whispered hoarsely, "At least they can't bury the truth again." His scar caught the courtroom light, stark and pale, the mark of a past explosion that had taken his wife and left behind a man stitched together by grief and anger. The federal officers led him away, his chains clinking softly, swallowed by the long corridor that felt colder than the winter outside. But Frosthaven felt different now. At the town's small central square, where snow still clung to the edges of the sidewalks, residents gathered in coats and scarves. The morning sun cast a milky glow across the gazebo, where officers and townspeople stood side by side. The banners overhead fluttered lightly in the cool breeze. Dr. Rowan Keene arrived first. Her auburn hair was brushed neatly, tied back in a braid that fell over her teal coat, the same coat she had worn the night she saved Valor, though now it was clean and crisp. Her hazel eyes brightened when she spotted Corin and Jonah emerging from the crowd. She waved, her smile warm and steady. Behind Rowan, Deputy Lorne Hayfield adjusted his sheriff's hat, brushing snowflakes off the brim. His lanky frame and patched beard gave him an unassuming look, but the tenderness with which he patted Valor's head revealed the true softness of his character. A podium stood at the center of the square. Jonah guided Corin forward, one hand resting reassuringly on the boy's shoulder. Valor trotted beside them, tail swaying with each step. The police chief, a stout man named Chief Harland Rook, stepped up to the microphone. Rook was in his early 60s with a thick white mustache and deep wrinkles carved by years of stern service. Despite his authoritative air, his eyes softened as he looked at the German shepherd sitting proudly at attention. "Today," he said, his voice booming through the speakers, "we honor the bravery of Valor, a retired canine whose instincts and loyalty saved not just 2 officers, but our entire town." He opened a velvet case to reveal a silver medallion etched with the inscription, "K9 of Valor, for courage beyond duty." The crowd applauded. Valor blinked up at Jonah, who kneeled and carefully placed the medal around the dog's thick neck. The shepherd let out a soft bark, drawing laughter from everyone around. Then it was Corin's turn. Jonah nudged him toward the podium. The boy gripped the microphone with trembling hands. His dark hair fell into his eyes, and his voice cracked as he began to speak. "I used to think trash was where everything worthless ended up," Corin said quietly. "It's where I found food. It's where people left things they didn't want anymore." He looked down at Valor. "But it's also where I found someone who needed help, and someone who saved me, too." He stepped back, shy but steady, and the applause that followed was warm, almost like a hug. Jonah's prideful smile was small but unmistakable. After the ceremony, Jonah filled out the final papers at the county office. When he returned, Corin was sitting in the passenger seat of the patrol SUV, Valor resting across his lap. Jonah closed the door softly. "Well," he said gruffly, "looks like it's official. You're part of the family now." Corin didn't say anything. He simply reached out and wrapped his small arms around Jonah's neck. Jonah froze, then slowly returned the embrace, his eyes closing with a mixture of grief and healing. Later, on a quiet hill overlooking Frosthaven, they visited the newly erected memorial for the victims of Harbor Light. The stone was simple, carved with names that had been forgotten for too long. Corin traced one of the letters with his finger. "Jonah." he whispered. If someone did something terrible because they were hurting, can they ever be forgiven? Jonah looked at Valor, a dog trained in darkness but who chose light, and then down at Corin, whose courage had changed everything. Forgiveness, he said softly, means choosing to stop the hurt from growing. It means choosing to protect, not avenge. Corin nodded, absorbing the words. Before sunset, Rowan joined them on the hill. Together, she and Corin held a small paper kite shaped like a red seabird. It symbolized the coastal town where Silas's wife had died, the tragedy that had twisted his path. Together, Corin and Rowan released the kite into the wind. It lifted, dipped once, then soared. Valor barked sharply, then again, a joyful sound. Corin laughed, watching as the kite danced higher into the soft blue sky. For the first time in years, Frosthaven felt like a town thawing not just from winter, but from wounds too old and too deep. For the first time, Corin felt like he belonged, and the snowmelt glittered like the start of something new. In the quiet after every storm, there is always a moment when the world feels still, soft, fragile, and full of possibility. Frosthaven learned that miracles rarely arrive with trumpets or thunder. They come quietly, through the courage of a child who refuses to look away, through the loyalty of a scarred dog who chooses light over darkness, and through the simple kindness of ordinary people who decide that someone's pain is worth noticing. And perhaps that is how God works most often, not in blazing signs, but in small, unseen moments, when a cold night is broken by one act of compassion, when a frightened child steps forward instead of running, when a man grieving his own losses chooses to protect instead of punish, when a community decides to tell the truth even after years of silence. Every day in our own lives we walk past people carrying invisible burdens. Some are hurting quietly, some are waiting for someone to see them, and sometimes, even without realizing it, we are the ones God is calling to be the miracle they need. So if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment to tell us how faith, kindness, or God's grace has shaped your life. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of courage, redemption, and second chances. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and the gentle strength to bring light into the darkest places. May His grace follow you through every storm, and may you always have the courage to be someone's quiet miracle. Amen.